When Trump was not going to be in the White House in 2021, bat for me, and I ended up getting a pardon from President Trump, which is hanging on my wall in my office up in the legislature.
Hey folks, welcome to Liberty Empowered Media. I'm your host, Jake Oakes. We'll have a rotation of hosts here. Today we've got Dan Lubin with us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So we're really excited to be interviewing our special guest today, Representative Phil Lyman. You're currently in our state legislature for Utah, and you're running for another office.
That's correct. Running for governor.
So you're contesting he, him, Spencer Cox.
He, him, his.
That's right. He, him, his. If you don't know,
There's three there.
Spencer Cox
Yeah.
loves to promote his preferred pronouns.
Troubling, but yeah.
Well, Phil, we thought that it'd be good for people to hear from different candidates, but also you've just got a really interesting story as it is. We'll get into a few things, including your arrest and a presidential pardon. That's really interesting. But why don't you tell us just a little bit about who you are personally and your life? Who is Phil Lyman?
Well, first of all, thanks, Jake. It's good to be here, Dan. It's good to be here with both of you. And I guess I'm a small town guy. I'm born and raised in Blanding, Utah. I love it. It looks very much now like it did 50 years ago, which I like that about the town. I'm a CPA. I care about my clients and my town and my community. We try to do good things. We've started some really good businesses out of that little office. Utah Navajo Health Systems, which is now the largest employer in San Juan County, was kind of started there. An area ambulance company that I was very much a part of, which I'm proud of, and has moved up to Salt Lake and gone international. Ultimately, I want honest people to have somebody that will stand up for them. I always say honest people have rights too, and the only hope they have is that other people will stand up when they see abuse is taking place. And if we would do that for each other, stand up for each other when we know that we're in the right, then that makes a difference. And I think that's what drew me into being a county commissioner back in 2010. It's what drew me into being in the state legislature, and it's really what has put me on this threshold of running for governor.
Yeah, I've been impressed with your ability to not be afraid to stand out. It takes a lot of courage to stand up on principle, especially recently. One thing that you've done that made you stand out as a sore thumb was to not go along with the censor of one of our state school board members. Why don't you tell us why that was? And for the listeners, if you're not aware, state school board member Natalie Klein made a Facebook post that many people feel was not in the best judgment. However, the way it's being handled is one great big witch hunt for what it was. But even a lot of your Republican colleagues that call themselves conservative are going after her.
Right.
What is behind that, and why did you not vote to censor?
You alluded a little bit to some of what I've gone through myself. So due process is an important thing. Seeing people who get tried in the court of public opinion, my antennas really go up when I see that. When I see the governor condemn somebody publicly, I want to know, okay, what's going on? What's the politics behind this? The fact that we're right in an election season and Natalie Klein is running for office and all of this goes completely ballistic, I start looking, well, who are the ones that are driving the narrative? What do they have to gain? And then I see the ones that are piling on and what do they have to gain, and kind of reading the tea leaves. And then I don't think there's any problem with erring on the side of staying out of it, especially if you are the legislature. If you have this huge hammer, the most powerful thing you can do is show that we're not going to use it. Especially, so the parents of this young girl said they were going to take civil action. The state school board said that they were going to take action and remove her from committees. She's up for election. So there's three avenues of recourse. Why would the legislature step into that. And I thought it'd be a very powerful statement, and I lobbied for this very vocally. My colleagues will attest to it. They were not surprised with my no vote because I was really vocal about this is an opportunity for us to step back and demonstrate that we can show the restraint that the legislature, in my estimation, should have. And I don't fault any of my colleagues who voted the way they voted. They did their conscience, and that's their, I grant them that. But I also grant myself the right to say I'm not going down that path.
Yeah, I think that's a very principled stance where the way you've explained it is you've not taken any stance on whether the situation was appropriate or not. You've simply said, I don't think it's the role of the legislature. I think that's critical for anybody in your kind of position to come forward and say, I'm going to remove any kind of bias and just say, what is the proper role of government in this situation?
In our system, whether it's justice system or just our system of society, we're very sensitive to selective persecution or prosecution. So if the legislature is going to take that position, then do we take that position for any elected official that does something that crosses the line? And if so, do we go back to Governor Cox when he called out a student improperly for being a racist a-hole, as he called him, at the BYU game, and he didn't face the same sort of scrutiny, which I'm not saying that he should have. I'm saying if we're going to do it to one, should we not do it for others? And then the fact that under the official seal of the governor's office, we're hearing statements condemning Natalie Klein and promoting her opponent and asking for people to donate to her opponent as if that will somehow help this young girl that's been damaged. And I said, if you want to help the young girl, let's start a scholarship fund. Let's put money in for her. Why would we be giving money to Natalie Klein's opponent with the idea that, oh, this is how we will show that we care about this young girl? It's like that doesn't demonstrate that. All that does is that's politics. That's like,
right.
The dog and cat fighting. And in the meantime, you've got, if the intention is to, show compassion to a person, let's do that. Let's just go show compassion to that person.
Speaking of getting involved politically while you're holding an office like that, I'm very dissatisfied with the lieutenant governor actively campaigning for one of the presidential candidates.
If she wants to do that on her own personal page, but when she's doing it on her official
right.
page and
when she's doing under the seal of lieutenant governor, I see an issue with that.
It is an issue. It's an issue. And the fact that she is going to oversee the election, that she is lobbying so heavily on, all of it is just, it's like, that is like crony politics or something. It's like, that's not the way we do things. Well, maybe that is the Utah way, but it should not be the Utah way. If it is the Utah way, we could do better.
Right.
We've got to do better. We've got to do better than that.
Isn't it her role to oversee the election process in Utah?
Yes.
So she ought to be a sterling example.
Right.
Another opportunity to show some restraint and say, I'm going to observe and see how this is handled by school board and by Natalie herself. I think she took the best action she could take, and maybe it wasn't enough. Which then we get back to the parents. May file a civil suit. And a judge would hear it, and I don't have a lot of confidence in that whole process, but at least it's the process, not this public square.
I for one was very glad to see that you voted against that, because
Thank you.
My wife and I have heard Natalie speak several times. We've talked to her personally several times. She's very soft-spoken. She's a very kind-hearted person, and if she made an error in judgment, she apologized for it. She retracted her post immediately. And I agree with Jake that this looks like a witch hunt by her adversaries rather than a fair assessment of what she might have done wrong.
Yeah, Natalie is a brutally honest person. And if I do something that she feels like was compromising some way, she'll let me know, and I appreciate that. I don't take it personally. I just see her as, and she was that way on the school board. And hopefully the electors say, whether she's kind or nice, at least she's a watchdog for policy, and she really is that. She absolutely is an advocate for children and for fairness, and she will fight for that. And she's got really good instincts as far as I've observed.
With trying to stand for truth, you've had people that posed as friends turn on you. I remember last year, one of your colleagues was getting a lot of flack because of a change he was trying to make, and you came to the defense of his character, not necessarily agreeing with the change he was trying to do, but came to the defense of his character. And since then, he's not reciprocated that same respect towards you. Is that true?
Yeah. I would say it's true, but also not. It doesn't keep me awake at night by any stretch.
Not bothered by that.
What was it? I think it was Ulysses S. Grant was asked. One of his generals had really criticized him heavily, and one of the reporters says, "How do you feel about General so and so?" He said, "He's a fine general, a good man." He said, "Well, he says this about you," and he said, "You didn't ask me what he thought about me. You asked me what I thought about him, and that's what I told you." And that's. There are people up there that, from the outside, people will say, how could how could Phil Lyman be, shaking hands with this person, or, showing up even in the same room with this person? They just don't quite understand the dynamics of policy making, I guess. And you have to, well, and at the end of the day, when you know somebody, you know their family, you know their background a little bit, you do sometimes, I guess, understand a little bit. And maybe I'm weak when it comes to
No,
like
I
cutting
think
things
that's
off.
actually.
I
actually think that's a very important thing in leadership.
I hope so.
Being able to be stoic about situations that you could become easily reactive to, taking a step back personally from a circumstance or situation.
Right.
And I have a lot of respect for people that can be bold and stand for something boldly, yet still be amicable in their relations. I think that's a very key thing in leadership.
Somebody said, politics is not about compromise, it's about conflict. And sometimes we try to make it about compromise, which usually ends up with nobody really standing on principle. If you understand it's about conflict, then you understand, okay, we're not going to agree on this. And you hope that you could get in and really candidly speak your piece without, feeling like, well, that's the end of your political career. I love candor. I love the ability for people to speak up and say what they think. And so if I value that for myself, then I would value it for you or for anybody in the legislature, and hope that they would, I guess, grant me that respect.
Yeah. One of the most frustrating things I hear about our political system is the idea that the Constitutional Convention was made up of a lot of compromises. I don't think the founders were about compromise. They were about deliberating what was right. And so were certain things taken out, certain ideas they went with versus other ideas. Yeah, there was a lot of debate and there was a lot of deliberating involved in discussing what should be implemented. But it was a matter of finding what's right, not a matter of, okay, let's take a step backwards and we have to compromise to allow this.
They'd come from the vassal states of Europe and England that seen what a monarchy does, and one thing that you cannot dispute is that they were intent on a republican form of government where the people were in charge of their own destinies, and not a king, they were not seeking for power, which is unique in all of history. That's what makes America what it is, and that foundation has set us up for a good government for a long time now. So
I think this is a very important point, because we have a lot of people nowadays who are willing to compromise just away just about every aspect of our Constitution. I think of Ron Paul several years ago, where he said, when you raise your hand and say that you're going to uphold the Constitution, he says, I do that upholding the Constitution, every bit of it, even the parts I don't like.
Right.
He said, there are parts I don't like, but I've sworn to uphold it as it now is. Maybe later on those parts I don't like will get changed, I hope, but this is what I'm giving my oath to uphold. And I've seen this in politics. A couple years ago, one of our state senators was proposing a new law in Utah that all of the religious leaders would be vetted by a state committee before they're able to become a bishop or a
Oh, man.
rabbi or a minister or an
What a
imam or
horrible
whatever.
idea.
And I discussed that with him. I said, I think that's very wrong for several reasons, but definitely it's unconstitutional.
Right.
And he got upset with me. He said there are good laws that are unconstitutional and there are bad laws that are constitutional. He says, whether it's constitutional or not has nothing to do with it. I'm proposing this because it's a good law and I don't care if it's unconstitutional.
Wow.
So,
That's a person you don't want making decisions, because they're going with their heart, and who knows where that's going to end up.
right. And
Yeah,
my point is you shouldn't compromise away important principles such as our inspired Constitution.
It's the contract, right? I mean, that's if we have a contract and we get down to a point of dispute, we go back to the contract and say, well, yeah, Second Amendment, I may totally get why someone hates guns and wants them out of everybody's homes. Well, go back to the contract. That's not something we're going to decide, when it says that right, will exist, then that right's going to exist. Move to France if you don't want, I don't mean to be glib about that, but it's like that's the contract. It's got to stand for something.
Yeah, and I think one of the mistakes that even conservatives fall into, because I think a lot of times we're so focused on taking an action and being reactive, we're not taking the time to study principles. And I've commonly been heard to say, what business do you have lobbying legislation if you don't understand the principles of the proper rule of government and liberty? You may think that you like the idea of liberty, and that makes you somehow a great advocate for liberty because you like the idea of it, and so therefore, because you like the idea of it, you should go start advocating a whole bunch of bills. One example is last year there was the Hope Scholarship Bill. Now, I think more conservatives have come around to understand how that was a bad idea, but at the time, I got flack for opposing that because they were saying, and this is an example of being reactive, we don't like the public school system and what's happening there. And so as just a knee-jerk reaction, we're saying, oh, let's give funding to alternatives. And I said, one, that's socialism, because you're asking your neighbor to pay for schooling. They're already paying for public school. That's already a form of socialism already that shouldn't be there. But now we're asking for even more socialism. And two, anytime you're assigning, and as an accountant, I'm sure you understand this, that anytime you're assigning funds to something, there needs to be some type of report or some type of track of how those funds are being used. And so they're not just going to send funds out willy-nilly. There's going to be some way of tracking, okay, how's the accountability of how this money is being used? Eventually there's going to be some kind of testing or something. It might not have been in the bill originally, but it is going to go down the route of homeschool is eventually just going to be government school at home. And so anytime you're using government funds, even if it was a conservative idea originally proposed, there's some type of accountability for those public funds, and the government's going to start putting regulations on it. And so I think that's just an example where sometimes we're so reactive and we're not taking a step back to say, what is the proper role of government? Especially our legislature, I don't see any discussion whatsoever as to whether there's even authority to do an action. It's just, is it a good idea or is it a bad idea? And we're going to debate that on whether it's good or bad. I think good or bad is certainly a discussion to be had, but there's a question even before that, though. And that question is there authority?
Right. Well, that gets back to the whole understanding of personhood and understanding that if you're born, you have some rights and responsibilities, and basically your life is your life, and that rolls into parenthood. and that rolls into statehood. And if you don't understand the personhood and parenthood, you're likely to get the statehood method wrong, which is you see the people as the masses to be managed and told what to do and directed, and it's like, oh, you're using too much water, maybe we should raise your fees, and then you maybe you'll use less, instead of instead of having the again to say, it's not. I'm starting to sound like Ron Paul, it's like it's not my problem,
Yeah.
But at some point, if government could say, those are your kids, that's your responsibility. I mean, we have this social media
Right.
bill that.
Yeah. I went up and I testified on that last year, and they said, they were talking about the harms it can do to children, and I said,
Right.
I don't doubt that it's got algorithms that could be addictive. I don't think any of us opposing this bill
Sinister, yeah.
are arguing against that.
Right.
What we're saying is it's the responsibility of the parents to parent.
Yeah.
And to be involved in controlling and being aware of how much usage there is and things like that. And they just kept coming back at me about the harm. And then they said, "Oh, are you in favor of regulations on age limits for cigarettes and stuff?" I said, a cigarette can cause imminent harm to a minor. There's a difference between over time, something affecting somebody's mental health because of behaviors they're doing on there, and lack of self-control, how much usage they have, things like that. Certain patterns over time that contribute to negative effects on them. If it's not some immediate harm thing, the government shouldn't be involved in this.
So we actually had a bill on it today, which was kind of a follow-up, and I voted against it, and a handful of others did too. And somebody behind me, because I sit on the back near the minority party, and he said, "Oh, you hate children," and I said, my wife and I taught a primary class, 7 and 8-year-olds, and it was right after I got out of jail, which maybe we'll talk about. And so I've got these kids there, and they're thinking, it's like, our primary teacher went to jail. What's that about? Is he a bad guy? And that happened to be that the first lesson afterwards was on honoring, obeying, and sustaining the law. And so I was giving them examples. And one of them was, what if you were in New York City and you wanted a large fountain drink, but you could only buy a small fountain drink? Because that was the law that Mayor Bloomberg had just passed. Nothing over 16 ounces. Absurd. Because of high fructose corn syrup. It's not good for you. So let's make a law. That will fix it. I said, so what would you do? And the immediate out of his mouth was, I just buy two. Yeah. And it's like, they know how to game the system. So we come out and we say, well, let's pass a law that you can't. It's like, first of all, you're not going to enforce that. My 11-year-old was smarter than me on the internet. And this is back when I was, smart on the internet. But first of all, kids have an appetite for social media, for each other, for those things. They understand technology. So you get into this whole thing of, okay, well, we'll pass a law, and by passing that law, somehow magically, oh, now look, we have no more, emotional distress in our youth because we passed a law. It's like fantasy world. Mm-hmm. Whereas tobacco, you can at least put it behind the counter and say, no, you can't. You can't buy it. If they want it bad enough, they'll still go get it. Marijuana is easier to get now than tobacco or, alcohol. So it's not that you have to take all those things into consideration. But I like the high fructose corn syrup analogy because that's a parental thing, and you can still go to the store and buy as much Coca-Cola and bring it home and let your kids drink it if you want. There's not a law against it, nor should there be, but there is some common sense.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that's. All of those things are, that balance of knowledge, responsibility, and control, where it's like, well, you teach somebody, you give them the knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
you let them know you're the one that's responsible. You'll pay the consequences of this, and then you let them control that if the other two are in place. And that's the personhood. It really is the core of personhood. It's like I grant that you are a person, and if you want to waste all of your money, it's not my job to step in as your neighbor or even your friend to help you, and it's certainly not my job to step in and help you take care of that if I'm the government.
So you're currently in the legislature, you're running for governor. What do you think in terms of your decision-making process, what do you think is going to be different going from a legislative position to an executive position? How do you think that's going to differ how you approach things?
That's a really good question, and I've thought about that a lot. The executive is not the legislative. And right now we've got a governor who does not seem to understand that because he wants to create all these commissions that will draft bills. We have the UEOC, which is the Unified Economic Opportunity Commission, which is the governor, a bunch of agency heads drafting legislation all through the interim, and then we show up and legislators bring these bills like, oh, this is the UEOC's bill. It's like, kind of like, this is a must-pass bill. It's like, well, that to me, that's coming from the wrong source. Right now, it's a jumbled mess between the legislative and the executive branch, and then you've got the outside think tanks that are coming in, from the University of Utah or Kem Gardner Institute saying, not to worry, we're the experts, we'll give you all the data you need and we'll help you draft these bills, and it's just turned into a dysfunctional. I think it's very dysfunctional and very harmful. At the end of the day, you've got policy that favors those that are willing to play and excludes those who are not willing to play. And people in the street feel it. They look around. They say, "This is. I am not being treated fairly in this game." We call it an elite economy now. Utah's got an elite economy, which I think is really telling because that's a few people that have the power and the authority and the money, and the rest of them are excluded from that.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting that you're talking about essentially overreach of the executive branch of government, especially with your history. Wouldn't you say that it was the reason you were, I would say, falsely arrested and had to go through all that ordeal was because of overreach of the executive branch of the federal government? So I'm sure that our public would like to know more about, it would tell who you are and what your values are, what your view of government is, if we knew a little bit more about how you came to be arrested and how that all panned out.
yeah. I'd say if you could say like 4 main values that you're driven by, and what affected your worldview to come to that, including the arrest, which I'm sure was a major part of affecting your worldview.
Well, it's interesting. I had a really good friend, an older gentleman, that wrote a book called Statehood, The Territorial Imperative. Bill read, and his partner Bill Howell had written this book, and I read that in about 2007, 2008, and then and I was just taken by it. It's like, we're doing it wrong. States are supposed to stand up for people, not be an administrative subunit. And in the midst of that, 2009, the town of Blanding was raided by the BLM, 300 federal agents. I watched it happen. I lost a good friend to suicide the next morning because of the trauma. And the community lost a real leader, a doctor, a physician in the town, one of the most respected people.
Yeah.
It was tragic. And you're saying, this is not right. And where's the backlash? Where's the sheriff? Where's the governor? Where's the county commissioners? Where are the people that are supposed to be in place to make sure this happens? One of the things in the book says, anytime, it quotes the Black's Law Dictionary, any power which, if abused, might lead to the oppression of the people must be delegated by the voice of the people themselves. In other words, the guy that gets to use the billy club on you, you get to unelect him if he's doing it wrong. None of that with the Bureau of Land Management. None of that with the FBI that came in and raided the community. You can't even find out who's in charge, who made this decision. You don't know. You can't push back, and that was really offensive to me. So I guess the principle there comes back to maybe that sense of injustice, of like, this is not fair. Elected people should stand up. I didn't want to run for office. I like being just an accountant, a CPA in town, doing things. I told my wife many times I could do a lot more good in business than I'll ever do in politics, and I think I'm probably going to prove that, actually. But you get to a point, you say, this is not right, and sometimes you feel called, like, well, if you feel that way, maybe you should go try to do something. And she was very supportive of that, has been very supportive. I always say, I married a person who does not admire cowards, and I've tried to impress her for 38 years now that we've been married, and yeah, she wants somebody that will help people. We did a protest, if you can call it a protest. There was nothing illegal about it.
This was after the raid?
Yeah. So 2005, 13, we had a town meeting. I mean, I got elected to the commission. We did a town meeting. Turned into we said, we're going to do a protest. We're going to do it in Recapture Canyon. Why? Because it's our road. It's right next to town. It's outside of our back doors. But that was an important symbolic place, because the BLM is saying, you know, I'm a county commissioner. I've worked on it for 6 years to get this road opened and adjudicated. They're supposed to have an emergency closure that lasts for a maximum of 6 months. So I'm saying it's not closed. The community showed up. Between the Friday and the Saturday event, there was about 1,000 people who were involved in it. And it was 5 months later that the U.S. attorneys decided to press charges against me. And it was because they were getting petitioned from Alliance for a Better Utah, an activist group in Salt Lake, you know, signing petitions. It's like, is that how the Department of Justice works? And the answer is yes, that's exactly how the Department of Justice works. And so the whole thing was a sham. So however I felt about the inaction of elected officials, you know, then I learned a lot about the Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney's Office, the weaponization of federal agencies against people, you know, to teach a commissioner a lesson. And that's what they said. That's what the U.S. Attorney said. We want to teach these commissioners a lesson. That what he meant was, don't mess with the federal government. Do not stand up to the BLM. So that your responsibility, your job to stand up for your people, don't do it. And the commissioners got that message. You know, it was a proud tradition before that for commissioners to go out and challenge a road closure. Sometimes they did it with bulldozers. We didn't. We didn't go into an illegal part. We didn't trespass. But I was charged with conspiracy to trespass. And I've learned in the federal court system, if they add conspiracy to your charge, that means you're going to jail, because conspiracy they can prove conspiracy, whether they can prove trespass or not. They can prove conspiracy because they look at your Facebook posts to see, did you like that picture that this guy shared of some random thing? Long story short, I got convicted in federal court. 4 judges recused after the conviction because we found out they're basically in bed with Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, which you can't do that and be the judge of the case.
Conflict of interest.
So the time it came time to sentencing, fortunately, he had actually read the case and sentenced me to 10 days instead of the 2 years that I was expecting to. I was expecting to go to prison for 2 years. And that's pretty traumatic. All of that lead up, the 14 months of trial and the money that you spend, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you spend on attorneys, and then to get 10 days was like a happy thing. But I did go to jail, and I got booked, and it was very real. And I look back on it now. You know, at the time it was really hard. It was really traumatic, and it was really hard. And you feel like this is going to destroy my reputation with my clients and my community. The opposite was the case. People respected it, and we could keep telling the truth about it. And blessing to have that experience and to know when other people are going through something like Natalie Klein, you have a sensitivity that says, I'm not going to stand. I am not going to be guilty of standing on the sideline while somebody gets torn apart in the court of public opinion thing. Then I get into the legislature, and when Trump. When it was apparent he was not going to be in the White House in 2021, I sent a letter, talked to Senator Lee, and asked if he would sign an affidavit for me. He did, and he went to bat for me, and I ended up getting a pardon from President Trump, which is hanging on my wall in my office up in the legislature. And at the time, I was thinking,
people say they got a presidential pardon.
So when you got pardoned, did they give you back your $96,000 fine that you had paid off?
No, but they did stop bugging me, and the U.S. Attorney's Office they were on my case. They were just on my case. I just felt like this is never going to go away, and I really believe it.
What was the basic principle involved in that whole situation? What was the main point?
Answers. We wanted answers. Why? Why did you raid the community? Where's the damage? Where's the artifacts ring that you claim existed? Why are you doing this? And all of us who are there. I mean, San Juan County we've got the only uranium processing mill in the United States that processes raw uranium. There are resources there. It's oil and gas. We'd seen it all shut down. And all these old prospectors who know what's there are saying, they're coming after the resources. They're locking up the resources, you know. So in 2012, when Hillary Clinton sold Uranium One to Vladimir Putin, we watched that deal go down.
20% of the U.S. uranium supply.
Oh, yeah, our strategic uranium reserve was sold to Russia by the Secretary of State, while her husband, the ex-president's flying around the country with Frank Justra, the financier, who made $1 billion profit on the deal and then donated $130 million to the Clinton Foundation. And everybody's just like, nothing to see here, folks. And we're experiencing it. And then we see our community rated as a justification, like there is a crisis here.
So ostensibly,
Sorry,
ostensibly they rated the entire community of Blanding as sort of a collective punishment for some minor infractions that happened over several years, none of which were committed by people that lived in Blanding. But they wouldn't admit to it for quite a while, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of artifacts in San Juan County,
Yeah.
and a lot of people have basements full of artifacts that were gathered legally or illegally. I don't know, but it's not a black market artifacts ring. But yes, they raided the town of Blanding to solve this problem, ostensibly.
Yeah. Because of things that were violation, as they perceived it, some sort of violation on BLM managed public lands.
Right, right.
It brings up an interesting point. You said at one point that this happened right after the Bundy Ranch affair, and that might have had some impact on why they did this.
Yeah. Our protest happened 2 weeks after the Bundy Ranch thing.
Okay.
Theirs was in 2014, in April of 2014. Ours was in May of 2014, planned months in advance.
Mm-hmm.
The raids were back in 2009. And I mean, you could just go, I need to write a book about this. Somebody needs to write a long book about this, because James Redd, who took his life, he had gone through prosecution for years prior to that over fake charges, trumped up charges. He was acquitted on all counts in December of 2008, and by June of 2009, 140 federal agents signed the register in his living room that morning. It reminds me of this, Craig Robertson thing here in Provo that, it's like, I don't know what happened there, but that seems pretty drastic, to bang on the door. You can't bang the door down, so you bang through the window, and then you shoot the guy 17 times and drag him out on the side. I don't know. I don't know the answers on that, but I do know the facts in Blanding, and so do a lot of people. So the offense was blatant. And then if you try to say that's not true, what the feds are saying is wrong, then they come after you, and then pretty soon people are just like, okay, just give them what they want, take a plea bargain, whatever it takes. And it's like, if they can do this, what can they not do?
Who owns public lands? To me, public lands are owned by the people, and as such, they should probably be managed and administered at as local level as possible, perhaps by the county or maybe in the worst case scenario by the state, but certainly not by the federal government. Mm-hmm. For a federal agency, an unconstitutional federal agency, to come in and act like they owned the land and that they can create all of the regulations and conditions whereby that land may be accessed or used, it's not only unconstitutional, but it violates the whole idea of what public lands really are. So do you have an opinion on who owns public lands?
Yeah, I do. In fact, statehood, the territorial imperative, really gets into that, which is kind of my Bible for those things. But if you understand, this is what I say. So in 2012, Governor Herbert signed the Transfer of Public Lands Act, which was phenomenal. I was there. I drove up for it. It was exciting. But even as he was signing that, transfer public lands to the state, I've always said that happened. It happened in 1896. That's when jurisdiction shifted. We were no longer a territory. We could now have our own governor that we elect. We could now have our own police power. We're no longer a territorial subunit of the federal government. We're now a state. Mm-hmm. But because we were kind of late coming to the party, some people started saying, well, maybe we don't want to transfer all that land out there. Maybe we just want to hang on to it. And then you get that evolution from about the 1950s and up to 1976, when they just basically said, okay, we're not going to, Bureau of Land Management is not going to dispose of land anymore. We're going to conserve it. And and unconstitutional. I mean, the Constitution is very clear about the federal government not retaining ownership of land inside the states, but it is a statehood argument that says we're not an administrative subunit. And that border that defines the state of Utah, that means something. Jurisdictionally, that means we don't need the Bureau of Land Management telling us what to do, even on federal land. We have counties. That's what counties were designed to do. They're in a better position to understand and know what's going on.
It's interesting. Sometimes when I speak to groups about the Constitution, I like to present this analogy sometimes to people where I say, let's pretend that the United States is a corporation. Now, actually, we don't have to pretend. Unfortunately, there is a corporation in the United States. That's a whole other topic another time. But let's pretend that this is structured like a corporation. And let's look at a typical organizational chart. Now, you could have some variance, but typically speaking, you're going to have a CEO, and then below that, you'll have VPs, VP of marketing, VP of finance, and below that, you're going to have directors, and then entry-level management, so on and so forth, okay? And I say, let's say that in this company, it's not a publicly traded company, it's a private corporation. The CEO is the owner, sole owner. He would be the final authority. Who in American government is the CEO? Now, CEO, we're hearing CEO and we think executive role. And so you can guess what answer a lot of people give, even patriots. Mm-hmm. What do you think people answer when I ask who's
They probably say the president.
They say the president. I say, is the president of the United States the final authority? Who is the final authority? What if I told you there's an answer spelled out in the Constitution? Now, we have to come back to the understanding the Constitution's a legal compact. So even your progressive friends, even the Marxists out there, at the end of the day, you know, we can have some interesting philosophical debate, but even philosophy aside, law is law. Let's look at the legal compact. It doesn't matter my philosophical view, your philosophical view. What matters is what the legal document says. What does it say? The Ninth Amendment. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Anything not enumerated is retained. And so I like to make sure I'm impressing this in people. And I even get into this interesting idea that there's the term state sovereignty. I actually don't like that. I like state independence. States are independent from the federal government. But something that's created cannot really be sovereign because
Good point.
states still are answerable to the people. They have no authority in of themselves. They only have authority that's defined and delegated to them by the people. So there's the relationship of creator versus created. And so I think it's important for us to come back to some of these just very basic ideas because we're being gaslit to believe that you're somehow a bad citizen if you're standing up saying, well, hold on, no, this is not appropriate.
Well, the Constitution says that it was ordained and established to preserve the blessings of liberty, to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. I mean, that's why it's there. And if people don't value freedom and the blessings of liberty, I don't really like this statement, but it rings true to me. Somebody said, you know, when I see people waving the Constitution around, it reminds me of a dog that's learned to carry its own leash in its mouth. If they don't have in their heart the principles of freedom, you know, the same thing that drove the Magna Carta and other big documents that says, I'm a free person, and that gets back to personhood. Declaration of Independence, you know, says, you know, consent of the governed. These are not small principles. They're like central to the whole thing. So yeah, the Constitution is really important, but it was made by people who felt that those principles were so important, and we should feel that those principles are so important. And then the Constitution, like, it really comes to life because it's like, yeah, I agree with that because I'm a sovereign individual because I was born on this planet. And no, I love that, Jake. That's you're spot on in my book. So
why Phil Lyman for governor? What are you going to be doing differently that, besides woke ideologies, in terms of policy, if you could give us, dial it into like 3 main things that you'd like to see happen as governor that you think would benefit our state and as a result, the individual.
If I were going to take 3 kind of policy positions and say this is what defines my policy, I say economy, energy, and elections. The economy is always, people can feel it in their pocketbooks. When you've got kids that, are looking at, even if they come out of college making $150,000, they cannot afford the bottom tier houses. That's a problem, and that's economy, and we've done it to ourselves. We shower in COVID money for 2 years, then wonder why a candy bars cost $4. And it's like those things matter, and so the economy is really important. When we talk about low income housing, it's like should the state jump into the middle of that with both feet and build 35,000 homes for people so that we can provide
a bunch of stack of packs.
Yeah. Yeah, when it's like, what should we do? We should deregulate, we should expand out, take some of this federal land, spread out a little bit, and reduce that cost. So, and there's lots of other things, taxes. If we would go back to our public lands and get back to some extraction industry like we've had in the past, number one, you go from a $250 billion economy to a $350 billion economy. The severance taxes could replace income taxes or property taxes or some tax. I mean, pick one that you want to get rid of. It's like, okay, well, let's get rid of the income tax, replace it with these severance taxes that we get from actually producing. It'd be a beautiful thing. It'd be, that's money in people's
production.
Yeah, and you get rid of the income tax. Now you look a little bit more like Florida and Nevada and Wyoming and some of these places that don't have an income tax. It's not bad for business. It's very good for business. So that's economy. Energy. We're sitting here on some of the best coal on the planet, uranium, nuclear energy, the technology that's there. It's exciting. We have oil and gas. Utah, and when you get into some of the really cool stuff, the thorium energy production, I have the Yellow Cake Caucus, I call it, up at the legislature. So it's dealing with yellow cake, which is refined uranium. So it's nuclear energy, but they said Utah has enough thorium to fuel the planet for 10,000 years. And there's enough in the United States to fuel the planet for 100,000 years. And this is not pie in the sky. This is like, we could do it. But the plant that would cost $12,000, not the production facility, but the plant to do this test, cost $12,000 in materials, $80 million to permit, and 20 years of permitting process. So it's like, well, I guess we can't do it because we can't get over those administrative hurdles. Energy independence is a real thing, a real possibility for Utah, and should be a big priority for us. And then everywhere I go, elections really are important to people. They look at what happened in 2020 and prior to that, clear back to Kennedy, or probably before that, if they were around before that, and say, election integrity matters. We should be able to audit elections. We should be able to see how these things are done. I'm a CPA, so I like the idea of a qualified, independent, third-party person going in and taking a look at stuff and issuing a letter of assurance saying, we looked at it and it seems good. Anything other than that doesn't really resound with me. If they say, well, all right, Phil, here, you can have all the voter rolls and you can look at them. It's like, it's not my field of expertise. I'd rather have a person who's qualified to do that come and say, we looked at it. And after we looked at it, it seems like things are okay. Honestly, even with 2020, if we'd have done that and somebody said, we've looked at all these things and we feel like it's okay, I think people would have calmed down a lot. So anyway, those elections are a big deal.
Even if you think it's total hoo-hoo conspiracy stuff, that there's election fraud, why would anybody have an issue with more transparency or audits? What is the harm in that? You could only benefit.
Yeah. It's become personal with me because I tried to run a few bills all in honest, good faith to help bring some trust back to a system that was obviously lacking the confidence of the people, and that's a serious thing. So it's like, well, hey, I've got an idea how we could restore the confidence in it, and it comes from, instead of having universal mail-in ballots, we make people register if they want a mail-in ballot. And right now we flood the state with ballots, and whatever comes in gets counted. It's like, what could possibly go wrong?
And voter list is managed by a third party.
But yeah, electronic registration information center, which is 3 people back in Chicago that are
There's
running all
no
this.
verification
and it's the
before
same people.
elections.
They run it out of the same office that Barack Obama managed his campaign office out of. If that tells you a little bit who's doing it, it's the Get Out the Vote, it's the Black Votes push, it's the Democrat vote, and it's it's anybody that can look at that with a straight face and say we're not being played. I mean, they're just not paying attention. And hopefully we've done a little bit with that. You know, we've shined a light on the Zuckerberg money and who the people that he hired. So that's an easy one. It's like, stop using ERIC, stop using CTCL. Let's do our own elections. I would love it if we could go back same day voting in person, voter ID at the precinct level, people you know, and you're done, and they count up the things, they call them in, and people now will say, well, how could you ever do away with machines? It's like, well, we did it for 200 years. It seemed to work okay. So, but elections
we overcomplicate.
In the 2016 election, my wife and I were voting downtown Orem at the city center, and the lady behind us was talking to her friend, bragging about how she got the mail-in ballot for her residence in California, but hey, since they're given the chance to vote here, she's voting twice for Hillary. So.
Oh yeah. Probably completely honest, good person. It's like, oh look,
Yeah, I get to do it
they
twice.
sent me a ballot. I'm going to fill it out and send it in.
Why
Why
not?
would you not?
Can you get to an honest, verifiable, auditable election if you only have machines, if you don't have a paper trail?
No, you can't. You've got to have a paper trail. If it's not auditable, then you're relying on the good will or the honesty of people who have an opportunity to cheat but just say they're not going to do that. That's not going to happen. I don't care which side. I'm not talking partisan stuff here either. This is like, it's like you leave the vault
common
doors open on
sense.
the bank and someone's going
Someone's
to
gonna
come in and take it. And to think that they're not is just, it's worse than naive. It's intentional.
Well, we really appreciate you taking time to come here. What is just a few key points you want to deliver to people that are considering the candidates for governor?
Well, I hope that if people are comparing the candidates, that they recognize that I'm different from the current governor, in that I'm not interested in telling them how to live their life or micromanage things. I really do respect personhood. I respect right to life. And not saying the governor doesn't, but that's personhood to me. I'm an accountant, not an attorney. I think we could use more accountants in public office. And I guess if nothing else, I hope that they would look and say, that seems to be a guy that puts his money where his mouth is. And I've been to jail before. I would go to jail again over these principles without thinking twice. Not that I want to go to jail, but I would stand up for people. At this you get to a point, it's like, all right, well, do your worst, because I'm not backing away from my principles on these things, and I won't back away from my principles.
Yeah. Well, best of luck on the campaign trail.
Thank you.
You've got a very supportive wife. That's great. And thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks. Make sure you tune in next time here at Liberty Empowered Media.